clots, a history of a blood clotting disorder, all those things can increase the risk once you add the estrogen in. And another thing that people are cautious of that we don't see a lot of would be estrogen-dependent breast cancer. And that's something that might run in families, and you might have kind of that propensity but not be aware of it until you start adding estrogen in. But there's not a lot of information about how many cases there's been. So we don't have a lot of good research on that. But we're cautious about it. We also look at blood pressure changes, so we want to make sure people's blood pressure isn't going up. We want to look at cholesterol, sugar, and we also want to look at liver function. So people that are on estrogen, particularly the oral estrogen, you can have some changes in your liver function because your liver processes almost all of your medications. And I'm pointing here because your liver's here. So if you are taking oral estrogen or most, I would say, medications, you run the risk of having your liver not handle it very well, and if you're unlucky, you can get liver damage, which is not good. So there's, when we tell people not to go above the recommended dosage, one of the reasons is blood clots, another one is liver problems.
Is there something with potassium levels with estrogen?
So that actually has to do more with the spironolactone. So the spironolactone, which is the androgen blocker, is a diuretic, and so that causes the body to release some water, some fluid. But what happens is the way that the diuretic works, it can change your potassium level. And when your potassium level goes up or down, it can affect your heart function. So if you have a really high potassium or really low potassium, you have problems with your cardiac function, which is a big deal. And then to a lesser degree, people say they get muscle cramps sometimes with the spironolactone, and that can also be due to electrolytes. So that's the male to female side of things. For the female to male side of things, I mentioned cholesterol as a risk. So high cholesterol or high blood sugar we see, high blood pressure is a possibility. Headaches is a possibility with estrogen or with testosterone. So some people get those either way. And liver problems, again, with the testosterone you can find. And as well, testosterone can affect people with bipolar disorder and some certain mood disorders. So for some people, if they start testosterone and they have a bipolar disorder, either that's untreated or even treated, you can have a kind of a worsening of your symptoms. So that's something that we also look for. And acne is a side effect of testosterone. Which isn't considered...
That's a big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's not considered life-threatening, but it's definitely impacts people's life, and particularly if you're 35 and all of a sudden you have this terrible case of acne, it has a different feel to it than if you were 13 and you were in middle school.
Well, and I mean, that's certainly, sort of one of the physiological effects of going through it is sort of a second puberty. And during transition, I think there's a tendency for a lot of transsexuals to sort of experience puberty, sort of psychologically as well as physiologically, and so the acne thing is what made me think of it. Is there's sometimes a tendency to sort of behave or dress like a teenager who can get away with being a little crazier, and as a 35-year-old adult, maybe you can't.
But you got to have the fun. I think we all go through a bit of that. That's true. And yeah, the acne thing is, I certainly had some problems with that early on, and it's one of the interesting things about that. I don't want to get too heavy into the insurance thing, but when you're an adult, insurance doesn't pay for treatment of that, or at least not easily. They put up a real fight. If you're 16 and trying to get treatment for acne, the insurance doesn't bat an eye, but when you're much older, they try very hard to deny it.
I didn't have that problem. I was very fortunate, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm told that's true for actually a lot of things. Even though men can get breast cancer, most insurance plans won't pay for a breast exam for men.
Yeah, the
insurance isn't an interesting thing.
Insurance is kind of gender biased in both directions. We've certainly all seen that. I was on both. I was on spironolactone. I was on an estrogen gel and a transdermal gel, which I still am, and I'm not on any of the other stuff anymore, but I was also on Prometrium. And when I changed my name, my insurance company would pay at the time, they were paying for the spironolactone, but they wouldn't pay for the Prometrium. And after I changed my name, of course, they said, okay, now we'll pay for the
Prometrium.
We'll pay for the Prometrium, but we won't pay for the. Maybe it might have been I was also on Avodart at the time. It's not finasteride; it's the other one.
Durasteroid.
The dutasteride.
Dutasteride.
Which was a very expensive medication, and they thought, that's a men's thing, so they wouldn't pay for that, but they would pay for the Prometrium. And they were flip-flop, and we've all sort of seen that, the flip-flop in insurance, what they'll pay for and what they won't.
Well, yeah, and likewise, I had the case where I was actually on 4, spironolactone, finasteride, estradiol, and medroxyprogesterone. And when I changed my name, they tried to stop paying for 2. They had been paying for all 4. I changed my name, and they stopped paying. They tried to stop paying for 2 of them.
It's kind of strange.
It's because also, so insurance companies are large systems, and they have these sort of automatic flags that go up for billing, and so things like considered like a men-only drug with finasteride raises some flags if you're prescribing it to someone who's listed as female in their insurance information, or something that a lot of trans men run into is problems with pap smear coverage, where once they're listed as male, the insurance won't cover pap smear anymore, even if you call and say, this patient has a cervix, they need this exam. Sometimes it's really hard to get those things through, and likewise, if someone was listed as female and we tried to bill for a prostate exam, that would be potentially also sort of flagged as like a non-covered item. And so that's a bigger issue that hopefully insurance companies are addressing.
And the interesting part for me was I wasn't changing my gender at the time. I was only changing my legal name. And it flagged something. But as you said, it's big systems with automatic settings that you have to talk to somebody in order to get them fixed. But we've heard from a number of people. I know we sort of experienced it. Creative billing.
Creative, yes.
Spironolactone monitoring is covered. Transition is not.
Right. Yeah, and that's because spironolactone is used, like I said before, for blood pressure, and it's also used for a few other conditions, like people that have liver problems that need diuresis, which is getting rid of fluid. It's also covered. So there are situations where...
And blood pressure, that was the one I think I was getting billed on, was blood pressure monitoring.
And that doesn't raise any eyebrows with the billing department, but depending on what your insurance plan excludes or includes, gender transition is usually not covered.
But that is changing. That is changing. I know a few people that work for insurance companies, and they remind me that it's not the insurance company, it's the employer that chooses what's covered in the plan. So we'll put that out there. But they've both seen at one time or another in the last couple years companies building plans that cover more and more coverage up through surgery. There was one of the large booksellers, one of the national booksellers. One of their health plan options, at least, covered transition, and it's like that's really good news because certainly, as you were pointing out, for a male to female patient, when you start hormones, you have, in both cases, but what I have relative knowledge of, you increase your risks for a lot of these things. And if you can get rid of, in the case of the spironolactone, having an orchiectomy or a vaginoplasty, you'd no longer need some of these drugs, and you can reduce the amount of chemicals your liver's processing. It's a healthier choice. It's good for your body to spare the liver a little bit. Once you get on hormones, there's sort of a medical need to go through at least the orchiectomy part. Even if you want to consider the rest of it cosmetic, there's a good medical reason for going through at least the orchiectomy to reduce your medical risks.
And also, things are changing a little bit in the sense that some of the major medical groups have come out with statements in favor of gender transition.
Yes.
That gender transition is
APA
the appropriate
and
treatment
yep.
for gender identity disorder. So that's supports medical intervention.
Right, right.
So that's and there are people that feel that it shouldn't be pathologized as a disease, but at the same time,
right.
It's also helpful if it's recognized as a condition that there's medical treatment for that's appropriate.
And we've talked briefly before about the next version of the DSM that comes out in 2013, where they are planning on changing that title to a gender incongruity instead of gender identity disorder, so that it's still something that can be diagnosed, it can be treated, is recognized, but doesn't have the stigma associated with a disorder or with an illness.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. Yeah, no matter what, you're going to have to bill, so you're going to need codes. So we can't make everything go away, but if the wording changes a bit, it's kind of nice. I wanted to ask you, because certainly in our travels, we have seen a lot of this, and I know it happens. And I can talk about this at length, but I won't. But a lot of people, a lot of transsexuals self-medicate. It happens a lot, and I'm guessing that you've probably seen some of that. But I know it's fairly common. It's very, very dangerous, obviously. We certainly don't promote that, but a lot of people do for various reasons. But you've I'm sure seen that.
You've come across.
I have, and I work from a perspective called a harm reduction model. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but basically it's a sort of school of thought that tries to reduce harm to the patient while working with the patient, basically while they're doing whatever they're doing. So an example would be drug use, supplying clean needles. So the idea is not that you're trying to convince someone to get off of drugs, but more that you're helping them to not get HIV or hepatitis. So by the same token, if I have people that are using medications that aren't prescribed, certainly I'll see them and I'll try to monitor them and help them out. And my goal would be for them to be getting their medication under medical supervision. But I think the really important thing is that people find a provider that they can be honest with and let them know what they're taking, because that's the most important thing, is that your provider knows what's going on, and that might possibly explain abnormalities in your labs or things that you're experiencing. So definitely that situation happens, and it's not ideal, but
I think that's fairly standard in Connecticut as well, that if you go see a professional and you've been self-medicating, there's a level of maintaining the medication you've been on, since dramatic changes can have real dramatic side effects. Pulling someone off medication that they've been on can be really harmful. So I believe that's the standard in Connecticut as well, that harm reduction model, that you sort of write them the script to maintain what they're on and gradually get them into a managed, balanced.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely something where you want, hopefully patients would understand where their provider is coming from. So if I saw someone who is on a huge dose of estrogen or taking something like large doses of birth control pills, which is really not healthy for your body, I would probably not write them a prescription for the amount they were taking, but I would try to work with them to to help them understand why we might need to go down to a certain level.
But from what I've gathered talking to people, one of the reasons that people have self-medicated, and there are many, is fear of actually having providers tell them no, of rejection, of not being able to. It's a real big